the height of the 18th century, the most glorious kingdom in Europe would face a mighty foe, the power of its own people. One man would rise to inspire the nation, to cast aside a reluctant king and a hated queen, and a new republic would be born in blood, the blood of the French Revolution. The explosion of events that became the French Revolution.
The French Revolution is this extraordinary moment when people began to believe that you could actually recreate almost everything in a society, that you could not only change the politics, the institutions, but you could change human nature itself through political action.
The French Revolution really does constitute the crossroads of the modern world where everything begins to turn in a different direction.
The revolution saw a feudal land turn its back on aristocratic tradition and chart a violent new course for the future. It would shake the very foundation of Europe, and its impact would be felt across the seas.
The French Revolution is the most important event in Western history. There are developments that can rival it, like the Industrial Revolution, like capitalism, but if you mean an event, I can't think of anything more important.
It was the revolution that upset things the most. I mean, again, when you consider that it got rid of the Catholic Church, it got rid of Christianity, it got rid of the nobility, it got rid of the king, it got rid of all these things.
The French Revolution would bring bread to the poor, democracy to France, and would establish a whole new order of society. But progress would come at a price.
It was really a moment of extraordinary hope, extraordinary ambition, and then it turned into this most horrific tragedy.
On the night of the wedding, there is an ominous storm. But inside, the grandeur of the ceremony lights up the palace as the newlyweds make their way to the royal bedroom. In an age-old ceremony to encourage the conception of an heir, the king's courtiers are present as the awkward young couple is revealed in the marriage bed for the first time. The crowd is delighted and expectations are high. But once the curtains are drawn, it's clear that an heir will not be so easily produced.
Louis was not only not interested in ruling, Louis wasn't particularly interested in loving either, and he paid her no attention on the first nights or even further into their marriage.
Many years will pass before the marriage is finally consummated. The lack of an heir will soon spark gossip all across the kingdom that will continue to plague the couple for years to come. The grand wedding gala continues for days. But outside the gates of Versailles, there is hardly cause for celebration. Years of mismanagement by the monarchy have left the French people deprived and hungry. 4 years after the royal wedding, Prince Louis's grandfather loses his final battle with smallpox. Louis XV dies a defeated and unpopular king and leaves behind a country on the brink of chaos. In a lavish ceremony, young Prince Louis inherits the throne and is crowned King Louis XVI. Despite his insistence on a grandiose coronation, Louis is all too aware that he is woefully unprepared for the job.
Louis XVI, the moment his grandfather dies and it suddenly is clear that he's king, he doesn't know what to do. He feels as if the world is falling in upon him. So although he's been educated in the full expectation of becoming king, he doesn't feel ready for it.
For a kingdom in crisis, Louis XVI is the worst man to have on the watch. The 20-year-old king prays, "Protect us, Lord, for we reign too young." Ensconced in their royal apartments in Versailles, Louis and Marie begin their promising new lives as young monarchs, while only 12 miles away in the city of Paris, another new era is dawning, one that is on a collision course with the monarchy itself. It is a dangerous new age of ideas, the Age of Enlightenment. Since the Middle Ages, European society had been broken into three distinct classes, dictated by birth. There was a great divide between the wealth of the nobility and the clergy, and the poverty of the peasants. Then, at the blossoming of the 18th century, reason and science began to challenge this age-old tradition. Swept up on a current of innovation and new literature, Paris now radiates as the philosophical center of the world. The city pulses with a great flourishing of knowledge, a shining beacon of possibility. It is the Age of Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment is a movement which says don't trust authority, don't trust anything that you've been told by anybody else at all. Think it out for yourself, test it for yourself.
In old regime Europe, you were told what to think. You were given information from above by your rulers, by your priests. And so the idea that you could map out all of human knowledge and then have access to it was revolutionary.
In elite salons across Paris, aristocrats gathered to discuss Enlightenment authors and the burgeoning Age of Reason. Voltaire, Rousseau, fresh voices who champion liberty, control of one's own destiny, and above all, equality. The passion for this new literature is highest among the upper class, but as Enlightenment ideas take root at all levels of society, the drive for equality will begin to threaten the aristocratic way of life.
What makes it dangerous is it means you will eventually question, why are aristocrats the ones with privilege? Can't we change the world to make it a better place? Isn't progress possible? All of that will eventually undermine the idea that monarchy is natural, aristocracy is natural, and hierarchy is natural.
To see Enlightenment ideals in action, one need only look across the Atlantic, where the Americans are fighting for freedom from France's old nemesis, Great Britain. Young King Louis wants revenge for his grandfather's defeats, and he sees an opportunity in the American War of Independence. Louis commits to the cause a total of 2,000 million livres, enough to feed and house 7 million French citizens for a year. His investment would mark the beginning of financial collapse for France.
America bankrupts France, in effect, because the debt which the French monarchy incurs in order to fight the American War of Independence turns out to be absolutely crucial in the financial situation of the French monarchy, because the French monarchy cannot pay those debts.
To keep herself amused amidst the ritual drudgery, Marie Antoinette presides over a parade of increasingly outrageous fashions.
Marie was obsessed with fashion, especially these towering hairdos that were several feet high, that took hours and hours in the construction and fit all sorts of ornaments and fruits, and to many people they seemed like an obscenity. They came to represent what was all that was wrong with her and with Versailles and that culture.
Marie occupies herself with court gossip, gambling, and the staging of plays. As her expenses accumulate, Marie earns the nickname Madame Deficit.
Marie is given the name Madame Deficit as the country is in economic chaos, and she continues to spend as if nothing's happened on dresses and jewels and shoes, and she was the Imelda Marcos of her day.
Of all the debts Marie incurs, the greatest is what she owes her country, an heir to the throne. In the 7 years since their marriage, Louis and Marie have yet to produce a child. Marie finds herself in an increasingly humiliating position.
The job of the Queen is to produce a male heir. It's absolutely essential for there to be a son. And during that time, people criticize, people are dissatisfied, people say the king should never have married this Austrian archduchess, and now she can't even produce an heir to the throne.
Marie is desperate. Louis's appetite for food is unquestioned, but sex is clearly not on the menu.
Il y a toute une correspondance entre l'ambassadeur d'Autriche et
Marie Therese, the mother of Marie Antoinette, questioned, If a girl as gorgeous as my daughter cannot get him going, then what is going on?
Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
Louis XVI and his young wife were not able to conceive for 7 years. This cast a pall on the beginning of his reign, and because his hobby as a locksmith was well known, there were all sorts of salacious songs circulating to the effect that the locksmith was having a hard time finding the keyhole.
Louis's disinterest in sex is seen as a lack of bravado as a king. Finally, after years of frustration and pressure from the court, Louis is diagnosed with a treatable condition called phimosis.
Louis had a deformity that made arousal extremely painful. Therefore, there was no consummation until there was a surgical procedure that could correct this. But he was scared to death to have it. And it took years for him to agree to have it. And when he finally did, voila.
After a simple surgery, the couple is able to have their first child, Marie-Thérèse. But there is no easy fix for the years of damage to Marie's image. Since the early 1780s, libelles have circulated throughout the country, pornographic satire of the king and queen. Obscene pamphlets mock Louis's impotence and portray Marie as a promiscuous harlot in a debauched and decadent court. The people's view of the monarchy sours as conditions in the countryside worsen. After a succession of bad harvests, deregulation has raised the cost of flour, leading to a shortage of the very heart of the French diet, bread. After 19 years of marriage, Louis has sired 4 children. Yet as a king, he remains impotent. In an attempt to demonstrate leadership, Louis dabbles in financial reforms. But his misguided interfering burdens the poor with heavy taxes, while the nobility pay hardly at all. With the economy in ruins and the people restless, it seems as if even the heavens are angry, smiting France with the most bitterly cold winter in 90 years.
If ever God intervened to make a situation worse, the summer of 1788 and the spring of 1789 is a moment when that happens. By the summer of 1788, you already have a burgeoning political crisis, and it's developing against a background of very serious food shortage.
For the people of France in the 18th century, flour is the essence of life itself. Bread, the measure of existence.
Most ordinary people in France ate at least 2 pounds a day of bread. Bread was all important. Its price was immediately felt by everyone. If the price doubled, you were in big trouble.
The nation in fiscal crisis, Necker urges Louis to call a meeting of the traditional representative body of the kingdom, the Estates General. It is the first time the representatives have been called together in 175 years.
France was politically organized in something called the estates. The first estate was the clergy, the second estate was the nobility, and the third estate was everyone else. And by contemporary reckoning, the first 2 estates occupied 3% of the population, and the third estate 97% of the population.
A lot of people felt it was very unfair for this third estate, which was most of the population, to only have 1/3 of the deputies. They felt it was very unfair that this should be a 3-chamber parliament, where 2 chambers, the nobility and the clergy, could always outvote the commoners.
May 4th, 1789. A skilled young lawyer and politician arrives at Versailles. Maximilien Robespierre comes to stand before the Estates General as a deputy to fight for a fair voice for the people he represents, the Third Estate. An orphan from the provinces, Robespierre had risen to academic prominence on a prestigious scholarship, becoming an eloquent speaker, prim in appearance, with never a hair nor a phrase out of place. At the Estates General, Robespierre and his colleagues are demanding that the nobility and clergy pay taxes, but Louis feels increasingly threatened by the growing radicalism of the Third Estate. Then, on June 20th, after a 6-week deadlock, the deputies arrive to find that they are being silenced.
On June 20th, when the deputies come to their meeting and find the doors locked, they suspect a plot. They move next door to what we call a tennis court, which was really a handball court, and gather together and swear they will not stop meeting until they have a new constitution.
The deputies declare themselves a new National Assembly, the true representatives of the people of France.
The tennis court oath is one of these great symbolic moments in the history of the French Revolution. You had these people assembled in this great open space of the tennis court, raising their arms in this sort of quasi-Roman salute. And for the National Assembly, this was a moment when they realized something of their power and their dignity and saw that they really could defy France's king.
In one revolutionary stand of defiance, the National Assembly is born. It will be a communion of voices from around the country, a parliamentary body enacting the people's will. But wresting power from the king would not be so easy as signing a simple proclamation.
All of these early victories that take place at Versailles are largely paper victories, and they have no teeth to back them up. And the fear that happens, that takes over the deputies at Versailles as we approach mid-July, is that the king is gathering his forces to disperse them, to overthrow them.
By early July, 30,000 of the king's troops are taking positions around Paris. To defend themselves, the people form a new National Guard. Rioters raid Paris's armories and make away with over 28,000 muskets. The only thing missing is gunpowder, and the people know just where to get it. In the center of Paris, there looms a massive stone dungeon, notorious as a symbol of feudal rule, the Bastille. The prison houses the city's stores of gunpowder and is legendary as a den of torture and unspeakable deaths.
The Bastille had been the great symbol of royal despotism, the great symbol of the kings of France running beyond the just limits of their own power, a symbol of horror for the people of France.
Amidst the rioting, there is a stunning outrage. Louis fires his finance minister, the people's beloved Jacques Necker, seen as too sympathetic to the masses. Hours after Necker is fired, word reaches Paris that their man on the inside has been ousted. There is nothing left but revolt. On July 14th, crowds band together identifying themselves with a small cockade, red and blue for the colors of Paris, separated by white, the color of the House of Bourbon. The tricolore is born. From the feverish crowd, a voice cries out, "To the Bastille."
Attacking the Bastille means that the people of Paris are saying, you cannot get rid of the new National Assembly. The people are acting, they're arming themselves, and they're basically saying, we take the side of the revolution.
At the sight of the approaching mob, the governor of the Bastille, Bernard de Launay, attempts to lock down the prison. He mounts a hopeless defense, and the marauders storm the fortress and tear into the guards with knives and pikes. Finally, de Launay surrenders, but the enraged mob engulfs him, dragging him through the streets. The jeering horde kicks and stabs at him until he shouts, "Let me die." The crowd eagerly obliges. He is stabbed and shot, and a revolutionary tradition is born. His severed head is paraded on a pike.
The deputies in the National Assembly do not immediately condemn this act of violence. In fact, they accept it. And it was this acceptance of popular violence that, in some people's view, created a pattern that was to have catastrophic consequences for the unfolding of the revolution.
With the smoke still clearing over the Bastille, Louis XVI returns from a hunting trip. In his diary under the date July 14th, 1789, he writes, "Nothing," a reference to his unsuccessful hunt. An aide interrupts and breaks the news of the riots and the fall of the Bastille. Louis XVI asks, "Is it a revolt?" "No, sire, he replies. It is a revolution. Victory at the Bastille unleashes the irrepressible torrent of revolution. The people had defied their king and won. There would be no turning back. As a symbol of the defeat of tyranny, the people, men, women, and children, dig in with bare hands and tear the Bastille apart, brick by feudal brick. They are beginning to dismantle the past itself.
The French went about the process of tearing down the Bastille as quickly as they could. In the absence of powerful explosives, this was done very painstakingly, but with a tremendous amount of vigor. And the bricks were given away, sold as emblems of the demolition of despotism.
The energy of the streets invigorates the National Assembly. A charter is penned within days called the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Under this daring new document, archaic class distinctions are to be abolished and all men considered truly equal.
The Declaration of the Rights of Man was a declaration promulgated by the National Assembly, which said in its text that the sovereignty belongs to the people, belongs to the nation. The king is nowhere mentioned in this document. Therefore, by issuing this document, the Assembly was effectively seizing power for itself.
With the new National Assembly as their voice, the citizens of France set out to change the very fabric of their world. They demand a constitutional monarchy, equal rights for all men, and justice under reasonable laws. They march 60,000 strong, leaving Versailles with carts and wagons overflowing with flour from the king's storehouses, flanking the royal carriage all the way to Paris.
Le roi et la reine ont été contraints.
The king and queen were forced to go back to Paris with the heads of their guards, who had been massacred in the chateau.
Qui avaient été massacrés dans le château.
Their heads had been cut off. This is really a completely unbridled violence.
Un déchaînement.
The heads were then made up with makeup and paraded at the head of the cortege, with the king and queen following.
Devant la voiture du roi et de la reine.
The king and queen must make their new home in the Tuileries Palace. They will never see Versailles again.
Once the royal family moves to Paris, they are the prisoners of Paris. They know it. Everybody else knows it. There are great limits to what they can do or even dream of doing. They are the prisoners of the capital city, there's no doubt.
Versailles is abandoned, and the assembly moves to Paris. Power is now with the people. France will have democracy, new laws, and a remarkable and unforgiving form of justice will make its debut on the revolutionary stage: the guillotine. May 1791. Nearly 2 years have passed since the royal family and the National Assembly have moved to Paris. Robespierre appears frequently at the Assembly and at the Jacobin Club, a debating society named for the former Jacobin monastery where they gather. Now, words are the very core of the revolution, and Robespierre speaks with an unfailing moral compass. His true north is always the people. He soon earns the nickname, the Incorruptible. France is now a constitutional monarchy, the king forced to share power with the revolutionaries in the Assembly. But it seems Louis's share is growing smaller by the day, as he is forced to sign law after law diminishing his own authority, and that of the other great feudal regime, the Catholic Church. Louis decides the time has come to escape the confines of the new republic and mount a campaign to reclaim his kingdom.
Louis had decided by 1791 that he needed to regain control of his country, and he knew he could only do that with the help of a foreign army. So the idea was to make a break from the Tuileries Palace and to head for the nearest border, a traitor as well.
With the royal family official turncoats to the revolution, power shifts from Louis, now a prisoner king, to to the revolutionaries at the Assembly. At the very heart of the young revolutionary government is Robespierre. He shines at the podium, calling for liberty, equality, and fraternity. He demands universal suffrage and an end to slavery in the French West Indies. And most passionately, he rails against the death penalty, because in the new age of enlightenment, Robespierre wants to discard all remnants of the medieval past. Europe had inherited a macabre repertoire of execution techniques from the Dark Ages. Unremittingly cruel deaths by drawing and quartering, hanging, drowning, and burning at the stake.
Well, under the old regime, there was a whole panoply of very gruesome punishments, and decapitation was punishment reserved for the nobility. And one of the things that the revolution wanted from the start was to have everybody equal in death. They wanted symbolically to have the same punishment available for anyone.
Despite Robespierre's opposition, a new killing machine takes center stage in Paris. Physician-inventor Joseph Ignace Guillotin devises a ruthless beheading machine, turning old-fashioned decapitation into a humanitarian experience. Dr. Guillotin describes his new device to the Assembly.
The mechanism falls like thunder. The head flies off, blood spurts. The man is no more.
Always a supporter of bloodshed, the journalist Marat prints an enthusiastic rant in his paper, announcing the device's new name, Guillotine. It will soon earn a nickname, the National Razor.
The French revolutionaries believe in humane values. They believe that unnecessary suffering should not be caused. And what they like about the guillotine is that it is quick, it's efficient, and as far as we can tell, although no one has returned to tell the tale, it's painless.
The guillotine will silence the revolution's internal enemies, anyone suspected of plotting to return Louis to the throne. But it's the enemies surrounding France that most preoccupy the Assembly. There is a fear that members of the extended royal family who fled to Austria will launch an armed counter-revolution. The Assembly calls for a preemptive attack, a declaration of war on Austria. But Robespierre argues against it.
Robespierre is one of the lonely voices who is opposing war because he thinks the enemy will win. Robespierre is afraid that the country isn't ready, hasn't got an army that would be able to defeat the enemy. The enemy might therefore come in and destroy the revolution.
Robespierre loses the debate. In April 1792, the Assembly declares war on Austria against a country ruled by Marie Antoinette's own family. A nationalist fervor grows. If Austria defeats the revolutionary army, Louis will undoubtedly reclaim his throne. And Robespierre, once a staunch opponent of the death penalty, has had a change of heart. The birth of the new republic can only begin with the death of a king. Dr. Guillotin's chilling new device hangs over Paris like a warning. The penalty for defying revolutionary law and order. Freshly christened with the blood of the king's guards, it will soon put an end to the king himself. By August 1792, with the king deposed and the royal family secluded in the Temple prison, Robespierre and his Jacobins are locked in a battle with the moderates of the Assembly, the Girondins, for control of the national government. The bloodshed has only just begun. Thus begins a new chapter in the revolution, a period of violent repression called the Terror. In a remarkable reversal, the revolutionaries suspend the new constitution and all the rights it was to guarantee. Police spies scatter throughout the country. Anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity is rounded up, quickly tried, and sent to the national razor.
The Reign of Terror was conceived as an emergency government. What they understood by terror was striking terror into the hearts of the enemies of the Republic, so that they would be either scared straight, as it were, or arrested and disposed of.
The slightest suspicion can send anyone to the scaffold. Politicians who say a kind word of the defunct monarchy. Anyone who uses the formal monsieur or madame instead of the new form of address, citizen. The air is fraught with paranoia. Neighbors denounce neighbors. The incessant rolling of the death carts rattles through the streets of Paris.
Execution is absolutely hanging over people's heads, in the sense that we know in Paris there are police spies, and there are quite a few police spies everywhere, standing in bread lines, listening to what the women are saying, and turning them in if they don't like what they hear. You could be turned in not just for complaining about the high price of bread, but you could be turned in supposedly even for not being enthusiastic enough about where things were going and the successes of the revolution. So just about anything that would stand out for commentary could get you into trouble.
The convention sets up a revolutionary tribunal, expediting trials and executions with ruthless efficiency. To consolidate power, they form a 12-man council and call it the Committee of Public Safety.
Ultimately, power had to be delegated to a smaller group, and that group became the Committee of Public Safety. Ultimately, it became 12 people who really ruled France as a kind of collective dictatorship.
With his masterful words and revolutionary vision, Robespierre soon emerges as the committee's fiercest guiding voice. And that voice is calling for more blood. And with the church already under attack, Robespierre stands idly by as one of the most radical revolutionaries. Jacques-René Hébert proposes a new agenda: de-Christianization.
When the crisis of the war and internal rebellion is at its height, people begin to say the root of all the problem is priests, is religion. And what we've got to do, if we're ever going to be safe against the enemies of revolution, is destroy the power of the Catholic Church. Superstition, fanaticism, that's what religion's all about, and therefore what we have to do is stamp out this whole thing entirely.
Streets carrying the word saint are renamed. Religious icons are destroyed and replaced with tributes to the new saint, Marat.
The church came to seem simply the enemy to the radical revolutionaries. Churches and cathedrals are simply stripped of their altars. Stained glass is smashed, statues are smashed. The wealth of the churches is simply carted off. Of course, for European opinion, this was something even more shocking than the death of the king.
Not even the Christian calendar is spared. Years are numbered no longer from the birth of Christ, but from September 1792, the overthrow of the monarchy. It is now year 1. Months are renamed according to the seasons. July becomes Thermidor, April, Floreal. Months are broken into 3 weeks of 10 days each.
The revolutionary calendar was certainly designed as a kind of weapon against Christianity, against Christian belief. Of course, by having a 10-day week, you'd no longer have Sundays, so people wouldn't even know what day Sunday was anymore. That's what they hoped.
The terror spreads across France. Insurrections are put down with a vicious, unrelenting cruelty. In the city of Lyon, where counter-revolutionaries are gaining ground, the Committee of Public Safety sets a brutal example. Hundreds of rebels are tied up, marched into fields, and mowed down en masse. A region called the Vendée in the west of France has also become a counter-revolutionary stronghold. Rebels and priests are tied together and packed onto boats that are then mercilessly sunk. Up to 100,000 people are killed in the Vendée alone. In Paris, the blade falls at an ever more frantic pace. But the French armies are finally seeing victories on the frontier. Under a brilliant young commander named Napoleon Bonaparte, the French army sends the British Navy into a demoralizing retreat at Toulon. The revolution is on the rise. Robespierre is at the height of his power. He has taken on the enemies of the revolution and ensured its success through terror.
For a time, the terror was very effective as a means of getting the country together, getting the government together, and fighting what was, after all, a war on several fronts. On the Eastern Front and on the Northern Front against external enemies, also a civil war in the Vendée, which was the bloodiest of all, also a civil war against the supporters of the Gironde and other revolutionaries who had turned against the government in Paris.
The terror has achieved its goals, but it does not stop, and it will not stop until it devours the very man who unleashed it, Maximilien Robespierre. With the blood of the terror, Maximilien Robespierre has rescued the revolution. An invigorated army is repelling attacks at the border, and internal dissent has been all but quashed. At the height of his success, Robespierre dreams up a loftier goal yet: to use more terror to mold a new kind of society, a republic of virtue. With the Dantonists out of the way, Robespierre launches France into an even bloodier, more horrifying period: the Great Terror.
The Great Terror is the name given to the last phase of the terror in the spring of 1794 into the summer of 1794. It's the period at which the tempo of executions really starts to increase, at which the atmosphere of paranoia, particularly in Paris, but really across the country, starts to increase exponentially. You can track the number of executions until it's up to almost 800 per month in Paris, towards the end even more.
Paris's executioner is busier than ever. But on June 6, 1794, the roll of the carts comes to a halt. The guillotine hangs silent. Robespierre has declared a new religious holiday, the Festival of the Supreme Being. He wants to replace the old Catholic god with a new one, the goddess of reason.
One thing about Robespierre is that he never supported these atheist policies. He believed that people needed a divinity to believe in. And he helped sponsor this cult that was called the Cult of the Supreme Being, with this extraordinary tableau in Paris in, I believe it was June of 1794, which had choirs of people dressed in white singing. You had this kind of papier-mâché mountain that was built in the center of Paris. And then at the critical moment of the ceremony, you had Robespierre himself sort of emerging on the top of this mountain, clad in a toga, and marching down. And I think at this moment, a lot of people felt, all right, who does he really think he is? Does he think he's God here? Does he think he's the king?
As the Great Terror spirals on, Robespierre's colleagues see the Festival of the Supreme Being as his departure from the realm of reality.
There are those who think that Robespierre really has reached so extreme and so unreasonable a position that he can't turn back, that his fanaticism has somehow overtaken him, and there are those who think he's just gone nuts.
Robespierre had spearheaded a revolution and changed the face of France. He had reordered society and engineered a bloody and tyrannical system to ensure its success. But he was destined to be one of its final victims.
It turns out that there is a great deal of enthusiasm for ending the terror. Nobody can figure out how to do it. And what turns out to be the case is that the only thing that will end the terror, and apparently the only thing they can all agree upon, is the fall of Robespierre.
On July 27, 1794, the guillotine comes down on the incorruptible. And the last blood of the Terror is shed. The Terror dies with Robespierre, but the revolution does not. The rights of man, democracy, the new republic, the accomplishments of the revolution would far outlive any of the revolutionaries themselves. France would enter a period of uncertainty, frozen between fear of another terror, or worse yet, a return to the oppressive monarchy that preceded it. 5 stagnant years would pass before power once again consolidated in the hands of a single man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Historians disagree over the end of the revolution. Some believe it died with the rise of Napoleon. Others maintain that the revolution lived on into the 19th century and beyond.
The revolution was the first and enduring model of a people taking its destiny in its own hands. The idea that the subjects of the oldest, the most established, the most glorious monarchy in Europe could decide to completely rewrite their history was something that had extraordinary resonance.
The revolution tore apart the old feudal fabric of Europe and forever changed the course of Western civilization.
The question raised by the French Revolution is how much violence is justified in achieving a better society. Do people have the right to overthrow what they see as an unjust system, to replace it with what they are convinced in their hearts is a more just system? How much violence is justified in doing that? We still face this question today.
As Robespierre and his colleagues were driving their country into the future, many of them must have wondered what the final outcome would be. More than 200 years after the birth of the French Republic, the ghost of Robespierre hangs over revolutions from Russia to Vietnam, China to Latin America. The French experiments with democracy have inspired models all over the world. Wherever tyranny takes root, the cry for justice is eternal, for liberty, equality, fraternity, for revolution.